Disclaimer. The 24 Shades of Blue Cold Case Edition series is about real ongoing homicide investigations. The following conversation may be disturbing to some people and is not recommended for all ages. Please take a moment and decide if you would like to continue listening or watching. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey everybody, welcome to 24 Shades of Blue Cold Case Edition. I'm your host, Andy O'Brien. Our last cold case is going to feature Donna Oglive, and today I have head of homicide, Steve Smith, with me. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
I think the first question is let's map out who Donna was and the last moments of her life.
Yeah, Donna was a 24-year-old young woman of Filipino descent. She was originally living in Vancouver, and she'd only been out in Toronto about 5 weeks-ish at the time. She was working as a sex trade worker. She was living in the area of Richmond and Jarvis area.
Okay.
And she was working in the area of Gerrard and Jarvis.
So, Steve, let's talk about the area back in, what was the date?
It was March of 1998.
Okay, let's talk about the area. What was that area like back then? What was it known for, and what was the visual of that area?
The Gerrard Street area was well known in the sex trade industry, all up and down Jarvis Street, basically from Front Street right up until Wellesley Street. You had a bunch of different types of sex trade workers working all up and down the street.
Okay, and so what essentially happened here? What do we know just from where did she pick up a date? Did they meet at a hotel, or was this just a random on the street type of meet?
Yeah. So at the time, the hotels or the suites, the condos, that wasn't as big at the time. They were the sex trade workers were using the streets for their dates. So whether it was in a vehicle, whether it was in a park area, whether it was in a abandoned lot, that's where they were filling their dates.
So do we know where she was originally picked up? Or
we believe she was picked up in the area of Gerrard and Jarvis. That's the area that she normally worked. She would move up sometimes up towards Carlton and Jarvis, but for the most part at the time, I mean, she'd only been here 5 weeks, but she was working that general area between on Jarvis, between Gerrard and Carlton.
And when we look at where her body was found, for viewers, you can see kind of an empty parking lot. Can you describe the area here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking Jarvis and Carlton area. So basically on the northwest corner, you would have had Maple Leaf Gardens at the time. On the south west corner, you would have had a hotel. Southeast corner was a park area, horticultural area, and the northeast area is a large apartment building. And out the back of that apartment building was an empty lot, a parking lot and an empty lot. And a lot of the sex trade workers would take their dates out there to fulfill the date.
So what happened essentially here was she had met this individual, and they then had come back into this parking lot. What do we know about how she was murdered and what transpired?
Yeah, we believe that they did have sex. Now, whether he killed her during the act of sex or whether there was a dispute afterwards in regards to payment, we're not really sure. But she ended up being, she died of strangulation. So she was manually strangled. We believe she was strangled by the offender's hands.
Okay. And in terms of the motives, you just kind of touched on it there. It could have just been something passion, or it could have been, was there any signs of robbery? Was there?
There didn't seem to be. I mean, it's who knows at the time, who knows what type of individual we were dealing with and why they would do something like this. But whatever occurred, unfortunately, it cost Donna her life.
And DNA from the scene, was there any DNA?
Yeah, we have DNA from the scene, and that's why we're under the belief that they did have sex before she was unfortunately strangled.
And when from the DNA, what do we know about the perpetrator?
We're going through further testing to find out the root population of where this individual was from, and hoping to be able to do further testing, genetic genealogy testing of sorts.
And the DNA that was found was inconclusive?
No. So At the time, it was inconclusive, but since we've had advances in science, we've been able to definitively determine a code for a DNA code, and we've been able to upload it to the National DNA Data Bank. So we have a successful DNA code.
Okay. And there has been no match, obviously, to anybody in the database thus far.
That's true. We have no match on the National DNA Data Bank, unfortunately.
In this area, was there other types of crimes consistent to this one?
There were no other murders of sex trade workers in that specific area at that time. During the 90s and the 80s, the late 80s, early 90s, there was a number of sex trade workers that were unfortunately murdered throughout the downtown area, but there was nothing that came back as a match to this. There was no DNA match, as well as there was nothing that came back to lend us to believe that it was one person committing a string of attacks.
And in terms of the area, I mean, when we look at the area here, you can really see it here. There was a ton of windows in the area, but because it was such a highly active area for this type of behavior, when I say behavior, I mean, obviously the sex trade industry type behavior, maybe people just thought it was just another night.
Yeah, I mean, the sex trade wouldn't have drawn any interest. I mean, it was so prevalent at the time in the area that people, for the most part, wouldn't have even looked twice. Now, if she was screaming, that would have been a different event. But I mean, we don't know what happened. Maybe he was on top of her. Maybe he choked her out, didn't give her a chance to even scream out for help. We're not really sure. But nobody called us to tell us that this happened. Unfortunately, we didn't find her body until the morning, about 7:00 in the morning.
And there's no, we look at the murder scene here. There's no lights in this parking lot from what I can see. Nothing that would really light this area up even. So she would have been, if she was being strangled in the dark, there wouldn't have really been any witnesses.
No, it's true. I mean, at the time, we didn't do a great job of A, lighting areas, and B, putting cameras in areas. I mean, obviously, these days, things are very different.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because she was obviously here for only 5 weeks. And here in Toronto or here in the country?
Here in Toronto. So she came from Vancouver and she was in Toronto for about 5 weeks at the time.
And there was no other leads. Nobody has come forward.
Nothing. I mean, this was a random event. So probably Donna's friends wouldn't even have known who this person was. I mean, he could have been down specifically to pick up a sex trade worker at the time, and it could have been a random meet. So even Donna herself may not have known who this person was.
And do you believe this person was on foot or in a car?
We don't know that. I mean, they very well could have been in a car. They could have picked her up. They could have driven into the back of the lot.
Yeah.
They could have done the date in the vehicle, or they could have done it in the lot. We aren't really sure about that.
And I think one of the other obvious questions is, was Donna on your radar at all? Has she, in her 5 weeks, had she made any kind of complaints or accusations someone was harassing her, or anything to your knowledge?
No, unfortunately, there was nothing of that pointed us in the right direction. I mean, at the time, we tried to keep tabs on all the sex trade workers just in order to keep them safe. But as far as complaints, you rarely hear complaints from sex trade workers, and if you do, it's very serious. And I mean, obviously, we'd take it as there was a real problem at the time, but unfortunately, we didn't get a ton of those complaints.
And in this area, do you think there was other sex trade workers in that parking lot or around at that time? In other words, is there anyone else that may know or have seen somebody with her on the street or back there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at that time, there was usually a number of sex trade workers out on the street, and a lot of them would write down license plates that their friends had gotten into the vehicles just for this type of event in case anything had happened to them. Unfortunately, in this, I mean, we liaised with the sex trade workers associations as well as canvassed all the women on the streets, and nobody was able to provide us any information.
Was there in this specific area, there was no cameras at all from Gerrard up to this particular place at all?
No, I mean, on the east side is the Parkette, so there was nothing there at the time. And on the west side was a lot of the low-rise buildings up Jarvis Street. And unfortunately, at the time, Cameras weren't as prevalent as they are now. They're obviously more expensive. They're obviously more cumbersome. They obviously had to be wired right into the building. So a lot of the buildings didn't put them in at the time.
I want to kind of take a look at the murder scene here again. How was if you could describe the murder scene and how her body was found and when? I know it was around 7 a.m, but give our viewers a bit of a description here.
Yeah, so it's basically just an empty lot. And she was kind of sitting slumped forward when she was found. So we aren't sure whether he had went out to actually pose her after he had murdered her. Our belief is more that she may have still tried to struggle to her feet, but was unable to and just kind of slunched forward. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to get any more air.
So if somebody was sitting down and slumped forward, it would almost be that they were maybe even strangled while somebody was behind them standing almost and bent over them.
It could have been. Absolutely. I mean, our belief was that he was on top of her and that she may have struggled up, but he definitely could have reached around her from the back as well and then just slumped her forward as he left.
It's a very odd position.
That's right. Yeah. It's not usually when there's a body found, it's just laid out prone, right?
Yeah. And you figure, especially when, hunched over like that, that's almost like somebody had put her in that position.
Yep.
To stage.
Absolutely.
Who found her?
It was a passerby in the area. So, I mean, obviously, once morning hits in the downtown Toronto, it's, every area is flooded with people. So, one of the first people out in the morning, it probably would have just been getting to light at 7 a.m. in March. And one of the passerbys probably going to work, walk through that lot every day and walks in and finds a young woman strangled to death, unfortunately.
In regards to her family, did she have any family? Have you been in touch with any of the family or friends?
No, unfortunately, we haven't been able to be in touch with any of her family. We've done our best to try to locate some of her family, but we have yet to find any. We've spoken with a number of friends from the sex trade industry at the time, and they're obviously still concerned in regards to what happened to Donna. That it still bothers the girls that worked there at the time.
I want to intro a clip here. So we sat down with an activist and veteran survivor of the sex trade. Here's what she'd like to say to those listening and to the person that may have committed this crime.
Donna was a beloved daughter. She was a beautiful person inside and out. She was a kindred spirit. And she and her 5-month-old baby lost their life on that night. And the impact is a wide wave. It just does not impact the people that were close to her. I do implore that you unburden yourself. Please come forward. I am not judging you in my heart of hearts. I really feel that you need to get this off your chest. Your conscience is, I don't know, it has to have eaten you up alive all these years knowing what happened. And again, in closing, I will say to you, I don't believe you intended to cause harm that night.
So that's an individual that, had known Donna and also had worked in that industry. Even to back up a little bit, Steve, we didn't really touch on it, but this was really murder times 2.
Yeah, unfortunately, Donna was about 4 months pregnant at the time. And that may have been one of the reasons why she left Vancouver and came out to Toronto at the time. We're not really sure.
Okay.
But unfortunately, yes, she was pregnant at the time.
So I think, to the viewers and individuals that know what happened here, this is somebody that murdered an innocent woman and her unborn child. I think, this has to be eating away at somebody's conscience. And I think it's really important that somebody has heard through the grapevine or directly from this individual. I'm sure of it. What's your thoughts on, have they told other people about this? What typically happens in a case like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a burden that would be overwhelming to try to live with on your own. I'm sure at some point the individual that committed this murder, for whatever reason that they did, would be telling people, whether they're bragging about what they've done or whether they were despondent about what they did that evening. So we think that there's other people that know.
I think the biggest message here is we need people to step up. There is DNA. All you need is a name, and you can close this case and bring closure to this case. Is there anything direct you'd like to say to the general public or individuals that know who did this or the person that did this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, things have changed. It's been a long time. Please just come forward. Provide us the name of this individual. We'll do the investigation. We'll do the rest. We'll get the DNA and we'll match the DNA and we'll prove that this was the person that killed Donna. But what we need is we need a tip. We need a name. We need someone to follow up on.
And if it was to the individual, if they do see this podcast, this is something where they can actually make it right, meaning that they can fess up to this and they can make this. They can do the best they can with the situation by coming clean and being honest, because this is a beast of burden to live with.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, maybe you have an explanation for what happened that night. We don't know, but we won't know until we speak with you. So absolutely come forward. Provide us with the information of what occurred that night in that lot.
Thanks very much, Steve. And that brings us to the end of our show. I appreciate you being with us. And if you have any tips on any of our cold case files, please reach out to Toronto Homicide or Obie Ax Inc., and you can be anonymous. Thanks for joining us.